Are you into art? Are you into music? Are you into great books? Well, we have a show for you because today we have an outstanding author. My name is Vin Dacquino, and today we have Linda Dahl. Linda, let's talk writing.
Let's do it.
Hey, great to have you here.
It's great to be
you
here.
are, to say the least, achieved. You have a number of wonderful books, but before we get to the books, let's get to you. Who is Linda Dahl? When did all this happen for you? I'm sure you didn't start writing yesterday. Tell me about you.
Well, I guess I could give you the unexpurgated version.
Okay.
Basically, I've always been in love with reading, and I always dreamed of being a writer, and I never thought I could be a writer because I put them on such a high pedestal. But from the time I was a little girl, and my dad bought me some cheap little metal desk, I started writing, imitating the stories I was reading.
Typewriter?
No, handwriting.
Oh, handwriting. Me too. Me too.
And then when typewriters came along, I remember I had a little portable Olivetti, and as time went on and I was in college, it was the late 60s, early 70s, and friends and I would go on these trips to Mexico a lot, and I'd always take my little portable Olivetti with me.
There you go.
And so, but I didn't ever think of it being a career until I got into my later 20s. I first was thinking about becoming a Latin Americanist, which everyone says, what is that?
Yeah, what is a Latin Americanist?
Well, basically, it was one of these multidiscipline Bachelors of Arts, and I went to a great college, University of Wisconsin in Madison.
So that's an actual college curriculum. It's a program?
Oh, yeah. And you can do that in many different areas. It could be Asian studies, it could be, in this case, Latin American studies. So I got a thorough education in everything to do with Latin America, including Spanish and Portuguese, the literature, the politics, and I kind of became a freelance journalist after college because I realized I was tired of college. And so I would live in a place, I lived in Brazil for a while, and I wrote freelance stuff for magazines. And I always tried to pick something unusual. For instance, I remember writing about visiting a priestess of candomblé, which is kind of like voodoo.
Ooh.
Very, very widespread in Brazil. And I went to some ceremonies, and I really became fascinated in how it kind of served as a group psychology for very poor people who had no access to, a lot of health care. But I interviewed her. I remember interviewing her in my stumbling Portuguese, and it was just a trip. But that's the kind of thing I was interested in writing about then.
So you had the bite to be a biographer.
Well, I had, the thing that has always pulled me in is character.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began writing, and then I really found myself compelled to start writing. Wrote a novel, and it was a kind of classic first novel.
Now, which one was your first novel?
The first novel, but there's a story behind that too, was Gringa in a Strange Land.
Ah, okay.
And I first wrote that in the 1970s, put it in a drawer, and 25, 30 years later, I was looking through some drawers and I found it, and this is after having written many other things. And I was looking at it and I thought, I can do something with this. And so it became, eventually, after many drafts, this novel. And it's set in Mexico, and it's all about the kind of, I guess, latter-day hippie scene, although I don't really like the word hippie, but, just a roving band of bohemians Artist types.
Yes, yes.
I got to know a lot of artists who lived in Mexico, and I began to really appreciate their music and their art. And where I was living was in the Yucatan, where the Mayan civilization was. It's also kind of close to Cuba, so a lot of their music and their art was very Cuban influenced. Anyway, that was a novel that preceded the one that I have just had published. As a kind of series, there's going to be 3 of them about the same character. But they stand
Now,
alone.
was character male, female?
It's female.
Female.
There's a lot of male characters in the books, but the main character is a female. And as people always say to me, yes, it's loosely autobiographical. But to tell you the truth, I can't tell where memory stops and fiction begins.
I love that. I always talk about the student who said to me one time, Mr. Dacquino, what do I do if I want to write an exciting book and my life is boring? I said, here's what you do. Don't write about what is, write about what if. Take the real and run with it a little bit and let it write itself. And is that kind of what you do? You use a little bit of you and a little bit of them and a little bit of here and a little bit of there?
Yes and no. I think I actually have had a very, in some ways, very interesting life. Not so
In
much
a lot
today.
of ways, from what I could see.
Well, when I was younger, I got around a lot and I did a lot of things. And part of the theme that goes through a lot of my books, not all of them, is also dealing with addiction. And that's something I know about too, firsthand. And it kind of runs in my family.
Wow.
So I almost see it, in a way, aside from it is what it is, as a kind of metaphor for obsession and for a lot of problems that a lot of people have that end up leading them away from knowing who they really are,
Wow.
knowing their, their best selves, if you will. And so that was one of the themes. I stress that because I really also believe in story and the characters, as you say, moving the story along.
Yeah. Now,
And
do you let the characters write the book for you?
I'm not sure about that. I remember hearing a wonderful writer, Michael Ondaatje, who wrote The English Patient.
Mm-hmm.
And they made that wonderful movie.
Yeah,
and
it was a wonderful movie.
Right, and a wonderful book. And
Yeah.
he said, he was being interviewed, and he said he never knows where he's going to end up when he starts
Yeah.
writing. Now, a lot of writers are not like that.
Yeah.
But it's like working without a net.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that, in a way, that's what I was most interested in. Also because I really love improvisational music. I really love jazz, a certain kind of jazz.
So you have a book that's an outstanding jazz book. That's Stormy Weather, or no, you worked also with Mary Lou Williams, yes, or wrote a book about her.
Right. She had died by the time I wrote her biography. Well, Stormy Weather came out of a passion I had for jazz that just came out of hearing the music when I was in my, I guess, young 20s. And I lived in the Midwest in Milwaukee, and then we were close to Chicago. And there was so much blues and jazz there. And there still is. I know New York is the great capital, but also there's other parts of the country.
Some wonderful jazz happening in some wonderful places.
Yeah, so I began to see that there were a lot of amazing women on the scene, and yet they always seem to be left out of
of history.
history.
Women get left out of history all the time. Took years. Sybil Ludington, they had her story completely wrong. It took me 3.5 years to straighten out her story. They had her with 6 children she never had, a husband named Henry she never had, a son who was a hero in Kansas and never was. They didn't give women the respect they deserve. So I'm thrilled that you did that for jazz.
Well, it was the right time to do it, and that book is still in print. And it came out in 1984. And then Mary Lou Williams, which kind of grew out of that, was I realized that she was a giant. And all the musicians, well, I'd meet musicians, some of these great older musicians, and they'd say, why don't you do a book on Mary Lou Williams? So finally, I looked into it, and it was similar to what you said. It was either a lot of her story had been left out, or
it was incorrect.
It was incorrect. And so got into that book, and that was, it got a lot of publicity, that particular
Now,
book.
was she mainly a vocalist?
No, not at all.
Oh, tell me.
She was a pianist. She was a child prodigy. Very poor, lived in Pittsburgh, black woman, and it was the 20s. But she was exposed. Pittsburgh had a very lively music scene back then. I mean, Earl Hines was there. Errol Garner came out of Pittsburgh. A lot of other people. Billy Strayhorn came out of there, for people who know the music. And Mary Lou Williams. And so she kind of also, along the way, the various decades, the things that she endured and the things that she triumphed at were very much, you know, a portrait of Black America, and the opening up, painfully as it was, to to acceptance by white society, and so.
And being a woman, so being black and being female.
And being a woman, and being a composer, and being a great arranger, but always you go back to. The interesting thing is the musicians at the time, like Dizzy Gillespie and Thelonious Monk, they were her close companions, and they knew her worth. So that was a very, very exciting project to work on. That book.
Yeah. Well, and that's Morning Glory.
That's correct. Morning Glory.
Good, wonderful. And so, where in the line of books did Morning Glory come? Was that like second, third?
That was like my third book, I think. And like a lot of writers, I've written books that have never gotten published too. They're sitting in the drawer somewhere.
Yeah, I know.
But that's okay, because sometimes you have false starts, or for whatever reason the book just doesn't take off.
I have a book that's been sitting since the 80s, and just pulled it out and realized, you know what, this book needs to be out. So hopefully by the end of this summer, I'll be putting out a book that I wrote 20 years ago.
Fantastic. And so that's what happened to the predecessor to my current book, just out, Cleans Up Nicely. That started with an old novel out of a drawer. And then when I finished the first one, Gringa, I realized I wanted to tell her story when in New York in the mid and later 70s, when New York was going bankrupt.
Wow.
When there was this really, funky, interesting, lively art scene, all the arts. There was a lot of loft jazz, for instance, I remember in these clubs. And then there was the punk. Well, I never really liked it that much, but for those who did. I mean, that was a very live one.
I touched on that era a little bit.
Yeah, and that's kind of in the book a little bit. And also the art scene for women. And what it was like to survive on very little money, but to be able to. Back then you could get an apartment for nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think today.
Lofts. They shared lofts.
Right.
I mean, you can get a whole floor of a factory, for a little bit. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
You're lucky you get a studio.
Yeah, so it's kind of strange when you're writing about the time that was my own, I guess, coming of age as an artist in New York, and realizing that era is really gone. But it was, there was so much going on, good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things still going on in Soho and some of those areas.
Sure.
But you're right, it's not the era it was.
No, and I think there's a lot of great music. There will always be artists in New York. There will always be that creative
Good jazz coming out of
thing.
those little clubs in
Right.
the village.
So I'm not going to say, it's just that it's different today.
Yes,
And people
different.
have to deal with it, accordingly. So this
So
book,
tell me a little bit more about Cleans Up Nicely. Basically, you're trying to capture that era.
I think that I was thinking of doing three things at once.
Okay.
One was moving this character through this period in New York City. And she gets there and she has one suitcase and $700, which, by the way,
Which
was
is
my
pretty
experience.
typical. I mean, isn't that true? What many artists, that's what they do. They take
Yeah.
what little money they have and they
Yeah.
just say, you know what? I make or I break.
Right. And
Because if you could make it there, you could make it anywhere.
it's in some ways it's easier to make it in New York because, for instance,
Where things are happening.
that's where things are happening. And so what I wanted to write, one theme was a young artist, portrait of a female artist coming of
So
age.
she's in her 20s?
Yeah, she's in her 20s. She's also, it's also a portrait of the New York of that time. So, and the variety of characters from, eccentric to thuggish to wonderful, every kind of person that she's running into constantly all the time.
What kind of art is she into?
She's a visual artist,
Okay.
which has really been exciting, and I've learned a lot. I've always loved art.
Are you a visual artist?
I am not, but I'm a visual writer,
Yeah, there you go.
and so I had a lot of fun with the kind of fringe art scene. I did a lot of research too. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like, okay, go back and really refresh yourself about this. All these different sort of feminist movements,
Mm-hmm.
and there was still at that time a real prejudice against people who wanted to, and I'm forgetting what it's called right now, but just do portraits of people.
Wow.
That
That wasn't considered art.
wasn't considered interesting, wasn't considered valuable.
Well, there was also a time when rap music wasn't considered music. And
Right.
now, it's up there at the top.
Not my top, but anyway,
Okay.
she was an artist who was going against, she was kind of a contrarian, and so she found herself having to struggle with that because she was really only interested in doing portraits of people. And so she, for instance, one time she was working some dreary office temp job, and she used to have to stay late, and the cleaning crews would come in, and the place would be deserted, except for this artist, Erica Mason, and the cleaning crews. So she ends up doing a whole series of these Guatemalans and Jamaicans and guy from Harlem, and she calls it Cleaning in the Dark. And just there's a whole series of things like that. In other words, reality, she's really interested in what she's seeing, what's there. And that wasn't fashionable at that time. It wasn't.
So does she finally find financial success as well as internal success?
Well, it's not a fairy tale, so
Yeah.
she does in in the way of most artists, she gets some recognition, but it doesn't really change her life.
That's a good thing.
And yeah, I actually agree with you on that. The other thing that happens is, and this is the third thread, if you will, of the story, is that she's been struggling with the fact that she's a drinker. She's a heavy drinker.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's that addiction again working its way
this
into
is
your books.
addiction working its way into my book. And of course, there's a lot of people around her, and it was the 70s. And, there's a scene in the book, there's a couple of scenes with a renamed Elaine's, and some people used to hang out at Elaine's, which was this restaurant up in the, I think, upper 80s on the east side.
I remember
It's a
people
kind of
talking about it all the time.
salon for well-known writers and certain actors and things, and somehow Erica she's on the fringes of one group, and everybody is every 5 minutes going to the bathroom. You know, why? Because they're doing coke. And this is the kind of scene that was happening then. It was like everybody was, you know, not everybody, but in a certain milieu, it was happening a lot. And she can't do it, but she's compelled to do it. But what I mean by can't is once she starts, she can't stop.
That's an addiction.
That's called addiction.
Yep.
And it's called, you know, people always say, well, why doesn't so-and-so just stop?
Yeah.
Look what she's doing to her life. Well, we know
we could see it, but could she?
Well, they can't because they're in the middle of this peculiar thing called denial. But anyway, it takes her up because it's called Cleans Up Nicely. And it brings her up right to the edge where she finally comes to terms or realizes this doesn't go. This is not healthy for me. I can't do this anymore. And so I don't want to give away the ending. But there is an aspect of self-knowledge.
By the book.
You want the ending by the book. And I'm working on the third and final installment, if you will, now. But each book can be read separately. They don't have to be, you know, you don't have to have read one to read the other.
So now, Cleans Up Nicely is part of 2 other books?
Well, the sequel, Gringa in a Strange Land.
Okay.
And then there's going to be a third one that isn't out yet.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that one. Where are you now? What are you doing?
I'm writing every day on this third book.
All right, now I'm going to stop you right there because when you say writing every day, what does that mean? There's writers out there who want to know, do I have to write 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day to be a writer? Do I have to write in an office? Can I write in the kitchen? Can I write in the attic? Tell me about you as a writer, your writing profile.
When I first started writing, when I was about 26, 27, I had a hell of a time getting myself to just sit down and do it. And an experienced writer friend of mine said, I don't know if I can quote him exactly, it's a little funky, but he basically said, every day, put your butt in the chair and start by saying, I'm going to do 1 paragraph. And so if you can accomplish 1 paragraph, then you're done. You don't have to worry about it. And from there, you'll slowly work up and you'll do more and you'll find that place where it works for you.
A very good friend of mine, Roberta Stillman, was on this program. We've been friends for years. And when I was first getting started, she said to me, Vinny, here's what I want you to do. Write a poem a day. And I promise you, the poem a day will grow. And I said, Roberta, I don't even do poetry. She said, doesn't matter. You need the discipline. She was absolutely right. Poem a day became 2 poems, 3 poems, a short story. Short stories became a book. Then when I got there, she said, now you're a teacher. You love working with kids. Now write a book about kids, for kids. She was right. My first book was Kiss the Candy Days Goodbye, and one thing led to another. So you started a little at a time, each day?
Yeah, and before I knew it, as you say, and it really is 95%, I don't know, something like that, hard work. And an awful lot of people have said to me, and probably to you, oh, I'm a writer too, I just have never
all the time
written my book. Well, I mean, you know, and I just go, The only way to do it is to do it. And
writers write, talkers talk.
And for some reason, you know, like there are a lot of times when I'm sitting, I work at a computer and I have this kind of set up on a very nice porch, but I don't have a view. The computer deliberately does not look at
blocks the view,
the
blocks distractions,
flowers or anything. I can be sitting there, and I usually put in 2.5 hours That's my creative limit.
What time of the day?
Does
Does it vary?
It's morning is best for me.
Yeah, I do middle of the night because no one's
See?
around.
Well, I've done different times, and when
Yeah.
I had, small children, then it was a whole different ball game. But
So you have to find your time, find your place.
you do. But my ideal time for me is probably 10 to 1.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I know that. So I try to be disciplined about that. But I mean, it's like I can be sitting there working on something, and all of a sudden, the thought will come into my head, you should clean the bathroom. I don't,
Oh, I know.
or,
The great procrastinator.
and it's just, I'm amazed because it's like, it's still there, the
Yep.
stuff that one, or people who call you, and I've tried to tell my friends very nicely, I'm really, think of me as being in an office where you can't reach me.
That's right. And you have to do. I mean, I have that problem all the time. I love my grandchildren. I love my wife. I love my life. But there's times when you have to have head time. It has to be your time. And you have to know when that is. Well, I have bad news for you. Speaking of time, we're getting awful close.
Okay.
So what do we want to leave this audience with? I'll tell you one thing we do want to leave them with. Your website, so that we can get these books. You need to read these books. They're wonderful. And get your hands on them. www.lindadahl.com. Any final words?
Well, all of my books are available via the internet too.
Okay, good.
Except Cleans Up Nicely is coming out in a month.
Oh, so it's not actually out yet.
No, it's not actually
Oh.
out yet, and it'll also be an ebook.
Excellent.
So both, and
Are your other books e-books as well, or no?
a couple of them are.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what we're saying. We're saying that there's no excuse for not reading these books. You need to read Linda Dahl's books. You need to enjoy them. You need to get out there and write. And you need to keep watching this program because we're going to keep coming at you. We're going to keep bringing wonderful authors like Linda Dahl. Linda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me,
You are
Vinny.
absolutely terrific. Some good advice. We want to get into those books. And stay tuned. Enjoy us. And thank you for being here today.